of the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. Coming to you as I love to do every weekday afternoon over the airwaves of ESPN Radio and ESPN News. Number to call up as always is 888-SAY-ESPN. It's 888-729-3776. That is the Stephen A. Smith Show in 250-plus markets across the United States of America. It is the Stephen A. Smith Show on Sirius XM, Channel 80. It is the Stephen A. Smith Show, simulcast over the live national television airwaves of ESPN News. The Stephen A. Smith Show is being brought to you by Wendy's, proud sponsor of the 2019 John R. Wooden Player of the Year. Plus, tune in tonight for college basketball action as Virginia battles Virginia Tech, presented by Peloton. Coverage begins at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. It is my honor and privilege to have my next guest. He's my former colleague at ESPN. He's a former NFL player, primarily with the Pittsburgh Steelers and, of course, the Chicago Bears as well. He's an outstanding NFL analyst, incredibly connected to all things National Football League. Right now, he's associated with something called Your Call Football. I am talking about my buddy, my friend, one of the best analysts I know on the National Football League. The one and only Merril Hoge is on the line with us right now. What's going on, Big Tom? How are you, man?
Steven, I'm good, brother. Good to hear your voice.
It's good to hear you too, man. Before we get into anything, talk to me about this with Your Call Football. What is this about?
Actually, it's our second season. Mike Sherman, if you remember him, Green Bay Packer head coach, he and I helped launch a league last year where the difference between the NFL, the Alliance, and even the XFL that's starting up, we play pro football. The difference between our league and theirs, you watch their plays, you call our plays. We gave about almost $80,000 away last year. We give $1 million away this year if you call a perfect game, plus $70,000 plus dollars. A lot of ways to win. It's like playing Madden only with live football. The technology is incredible. It allows fans to really be active with the game, the entire game. You know, they call our plays, every play. Something different with our league. There's no punt. Once you cross the 50, you got to go forward on fourth down or kick a field goal. So it's interesting. It's intriguing. It's exciting for the fans because now instead of that one play that they contemplate and talk about, they get to call every play.
How did this stuff get started, man? Talk to me about this because we had a discussion about this a couple of years ago. Talk to me about where this springboarded from.
Yeah, really. George Collin is actually the sole investor, and him and his son, really the technology. They really started watching football and playing Madden. They're like, wouldn't it be cool to be able to do that live? And so they developed this technology. And what is critical is the streaming aspect of it. Stephen, as you imagine, has to be spot on. You can't be delayed. And so they've been able to master that. You know, we played 3 games, technically 4 last year, and it was a massive success. We'll play 4 this year. Our first game will start September 25th at 8 p.m. Here, actually, I'm in the Jacksonville Jaguars facility right now where we practice, and this is where we'll play. So it kind of started from that, really. And, you know, they've really developed it and evolved it to where it's become a really exciting thing as far as sports go in the gaming industry.
Merril Hoge right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio and ESPN News. And when you talk about it in the gaming industry, you know, recently we heard stuff about, you remember when the Supreme Court came down with its ruling, basically spearheading, you know, I shouldn't say spearheading, but basically facilitating the states getting more involved in the sport of gambling. And, and when you look at it from that perspective, I guess what I'm asking is, you know, a league like this, Your Call Football, and the kind of things that you just described that you're doing, how much will that play a role, if any at all, into how gambling may become even more of a part of sports? I'm talking about legalized gambling from state to state. How will that factor into it all?
Well, you know, I really don't know specifically. You know, here's where I think the technology could be implemented, say, from the NFL perspective, is put it into the Pro Bowl. You know, giving them access, using that technology where the fans actually call the play, you know, and are seriously involved in the in the process of playing spring games in college football. And actually, this technology can be applicable to actually every sport. It's not just football. So, you know, that's kind of, I think, the limit, right? You know, there's no, it's never, actually, when it was first presented to me, I thought they were talking about NFL plays being called. And I'm like, oh, that ain't never happening. So I told right there, that ain't never happened.
Right.
But then once I understood it, then I got my head wrapped around it. It was just, it's been a fascinating experience. One of the most exciting things I've done in sports.
You know, Merrill, as we look back and allow me to transition into the season that just expired with the Patriots winning the Super Bowl over the Los Angeles Rams just a couple of weeks ago, as you reflect on this past NFL season, what did you peel away from it? There's a lot of things to do. I'm thinking about the quality of play. I'm thinking about, the safety measures. You and I have had discussions in the past about the concussion issue and how that's resonated with the National Football League. Colin Kaepernick, in his case, just got settled against the National Football League. There's so many different directions in which to go when you're talking about the National Football League. As a person that played in it, that has talked about it extensively over the last several years on an elite level, how are you feeling about the NFL game in this day and age?
It's funny. I got a lot of coaches. John Jackson is a teammate of mine. He's one of my coaches. Solomon Wilcox is the other head coach.
Okay.
Ray Sherman, Kurt Schottenheimer, Duffner. These kind of names they've been coaches in the NFL or players in the NFL. And, we're talking about just when we played versus where it exists today. And there's a bunch of ways you can look at it. From a player perspective and a league perspective, I don't think that players that are playing today, if they don't walk away from the game really prepared for life's work, absolutely shame on them. There is so many resources, so much opportunity for players to be successful outside of the game that if they fail to do it, that's on them. Now, I know that's somewhat just player specific. When you look at, though, what the league is doing in outreach circumstances in all communities, they're evolving and growing there. They're behind the eight ball as far as the concussion thing back in the 90s. They're the pioneers and front runners now, and they don't get credit for that. The way they've went about cleaning up the game, and I've been a part of that process, make the game better and safer than it's ever been, and that leads to, a lot of things that are on the corrupt level, things that have happened that are, and I think over time, people are going to start getting exposed for the message and the narrative. When you think about head trauma, the message you get for CTE, when you hear that's pretty much driven out of Boston University. That may be one of the most corrupt, the CTE Center, that may be one of the most corrupt departments I've ever seen in a university. Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
Oh, my gosh. If you look at how grotesquely they have abused science without finishing the steps of science, yet created a narrative and messaging without doing that, the steps of science that are required from subconcussion is not even scientific. They haven't even done the steps there. There's no such evidence of concussions causing CTE. CTE has never killed anybody. CTE has never caused somebody to commit suicide. All the narrative that has been driven out of there, they're starting to get exposed now, because here's what they can't do. They can't prove what they're saying. All the things I just said, I can prove. Not only can I prove scientifically what I've just said,
right,
I can prove it physically.
But Merrill, what would you say to folks that would debunk what you just said? And they'll say, look at the changes that the NFL has made. Look at the focus that they have placed on safening the league or trying to do what they can to alleviate some of those concussion concerns that people have had. They would talk about CTE and the studies that have been done by Boston University or whoever it was. They would talk about all of these different things. And they'll say, excuse me, the evidence that was brought to us has basically incited and provoked us to really, really take this and treat this with the seriousness that it deserves, which is what has ultimately led to the implementation of new rules that you yourself have agreed has made the game significantly safer than it once was. What do you say to that?
You'd be grotesquely uninformed. Because in 1991, the Pittsburgh Steelers started cognitive testing. What was Boston University doing then? CT Center wasn't even around. There's two different categories there, Stephen A.
Okay.
When you look at protocols and treatments and therapies, that's a completely different subject than the pattern CTE. That's all that is a pattern. in an observation state. Nobody knows what causes it, and nobody knows what it causes. There's people who have this pattern CTE, never played sports, never had a history of head trauma. And I bet you've never heard that, and most people don't know that. And clearly, Boston University doesn't want you to know that, because then they get exposed for how corrupt they really are. Now, when you look at that, everybody blends it together. It doesn't belong together. When you look at protocols, the Pittsburgh Steelers were doing cognitive testing in 1991. How do I know that? I was part of that group. It was voluntary. It wasn't mandatory. But keep in mind, the brain world didn't come up with that. Chuck Noll came up with that. Chuck Noll challenges Joe Maroon.
For those that don't know, hold on, Merrill. For those that don't know, Chuck Noll is the former head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who, by the way, led them to their first 4 Super Bowl titles before Bill Cowher won one and Mike Tomlin won one. Go ahead, Merrill. I just wanted to make sure people knew who that was.
You know what? Thanks, Stephen A., because why I think that's important is he was much more than a coach. He was a great teacher and a great leader, and he looked outside the scope. And really what happened is one of our quarterback, Bobby Brister, had gotten a concussion, and Joe Maroon, our neurologist on staff, didn't think he should play. And really what Chuck did is he's like, Joe, you just can't come in here on a Friday and tell me he can't play. You know, we need subjective and objective information. So that's really where cognitive testing was really stimulated. So Joe Maroon and Dr. Love will get together, and they develop cognitive testing. So in 1991, it started to evolve. You know, and when you think about protocols where we are today, and quite honestly, that's what the NFL gets nailed for. They just get nailed for being late to implement it. Okay, they didn't have stuff sitting behind that nobody else knew about. Okay, I can prove that to be wrong, but that would take an entire show to have that discussion. But if anybody goes, oh, it was a conspiracy, they knew all this. No, they didn't. They just failed to react quick enough. Because in 1991, I'm going to tell you this, when that happens, you go look at what the history is of head trauma and the brain world and what they really knew at that time. Nobody was more advanced at that time, and they were just sitting on things. So that being said, there's just 2 different areas, Stephen A. Protocols, treatments, all those things have made actually sports better and safer than it's ever been. But we have a fear factor now, especially, and I'm more passionate about youth sports, quite honestly. I'm not really I'm not concerned about the NFL. I'm concerned about youth sports, the mom and dads that are hearing this narrative that if their son or daughter have a concussion, they're going to get CTE. There's no such evidence of that. Subconcussion isn't even scientific. They have yet to even accomplish one step of the science requirements to make it scientific. But there's a lot of literature that we'll talk about. It's poorly defined. It's misleading. It's science fiction.
You have always been very, very adamant in your position. And your position, for those of you who don't know, you're incredibly consistent with how you feel. You and I have been talking about this for years, and you have never wavered one bit from your position. Do you believe, Merrill Hodge, that assuming that what you say is correct, and Boston University and others and the stuff that they put out about CTE and what have you, are you of the mindset that this is a concerted effort to ruin football in America? Well, is that your mentality?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt they're attacking youth football, because that is the one area that they can't fight like the NFL. They can't fight like the NCAA. They don't have the type of money. It is about that, and it's about money. And listen, they're going to finally – people are going to start digging. I mean, it's already started. The bricks have started to fall. They're going to start getting exposed for what they have done, what they have said, because they can't prove any of their stuff. You look at some of their websites, they have subconcussion caused CT. There is no scientific evidence of that. Shoot, you haven't even done the scientific steps to make subconcussion a thing. That'd be like if you went on a roller coaster, jumped on a trampoline.
Okay.
Or everybody in the world has done stuff like that. We'd all be doomed.
Well, let me get away from the actual issue of CTE and all of that stuff, and instead just focus on football from this premise. There is no doubt that it is a violent sport. There is no doubt that there are residual effects from playing the sport that can be incredibly, debilitating. For example, I mean, not that this has anything to do with the head, but just watch Earl Campbell, who used to play football for the Houston Oilers. He walking around. Oh my God! You see so many guys, and the violence that exists in the sport. There are people that have elevated their level of concern as it pertains to that, and has used that as impetus to say, football, you know what? It's not it's so much more damaging than people realize, and maybe we should go away from that. I'm not of that thinking. As far as I'm concerned, MMA, boxing, all of this stuff, that comes with it. You know what you're signing up for. But there are people who say stuff like that. What do you say to those people, Merril Hoge?
No, I'm going to tell you this. I don't know of it. I don't know in the history of it. I don't know anybody that's been forced to play in the NFL. I don't know of it. I mean, that is a choice. Let's see what's funny. I had a FedEx driver, and just so we're balanced here, this happens to the UPS driver that comes to my house almost regularly. Both of them get out, start limping. And I'm like, well, what happened to you? Oh, I'm getting out of this truck for 10 years. I got to get a new hip. I'm like, wow, okay. Well, they better stop letting you get in the truck and getting out there because wear and tear. I mean, there's risks we run with everything,
right,
Stephen A. To say that you're going to live a risk-free life, there's not risk in anything. Sure there is. In fact, when we look at where we are in sports today, those risks, we've minimized them at its greatest degree when you look at equipment, instruction. Okay, keep in mind, we've been playing football for nearly 100 years. Think about this. For 90 of it, we never did anything about head trauma. Nothing. You have hundreds of millions of people who are living today and well into their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, and played in an environment where you couldn't even drink water, keep in mind. Equipment was paper mache to what we have today. All of those things existed. You literally have hundreds of millions of people to pick from, and they can't find, meaning Boston University, one person that go, aha, because you played contact sports, you have issues later in life. There's not one ounce of evidence of that. We have made sports better and safer than they've ever been, and parents are being blinded by this false narrative that they're driving, and they're missing what is really should be exciting for them, that if their son or daughter would have a concussion, the treatments that are available now to care for your kids before they return to the environment of whatever activity they are on, that's what we need to share with them. That's what they need to know. If they knew that, they'd be much more empowered about letting their kids be active and knowing how to take care of them if an accident were to happen.
Merril Hoge, I got a strange question for you. In light of everything that you're saying, do you think that the NFL may have gone too far in the opposite direction to be entirely too safe? Because I run across defensive players all the time in the National Football League that are losing their minds and pulling their hair out of their head because they're so disgusted with how these rules favor offensive players. They literally talk as if you can't have bad breath and breathe in a quarterback's face before getting penalized. That's how pathetic they think it is. What do you say to that?
Well, listen, I'm going to tell you this. The burden falls on the defender. I'm never going to argue that. I've been on the rules committee and helped with a lot of cleaning up the game. Now, the one thing that's never been put in there, Stephen A., which gets confused, you still can hit the other guy as hard as you want. It's just hit him in the right zone with the right technique. Now, the start of this year, yeah, that was a little bit of a debacle in, the changes of hitting the quarterback. It took them a while to really get the right parameters in place, and it looked bad earlier, but they got that cleaned up. It took about half the season, and there were some hits that were just like mind-boggling, head shakers, but it took the officials a little while. They just have huge responsibility on them. So, and human error is going to be a part of all of this. But when you really look at the game, hitting the other guy as hard as you can the right way is what they're asking you to do. You're going to get out of position at times.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But that's easier said than done, Merril. I mean, if you've been playing football one way forever and then they change it up on you, that's kind of hard, isn't it?
Well, actually, no. Stephen A., nobody has ever, in the history of football, nobody has ever run these drills. Throwing your elbow to the head, leading and launching with the crown of your helmet. Nobody practices it. I'm running the league right now. It is one of the greatest professional environments I have ever seen from a tackling perspective. One of our very first games last year, I was like, from a professional environment, and we never had one live scrimmage. Our first live event was a game. I'm like, it was one of the most incredible professional tackling performances I have ever seen at a professional level. Professionals are taught how to tackle, how to wrap up. Now, what happened way back is the game eroded, elbows started flying, leading and launching, hitting at the head. But you don't practice those. Those aren't drills that you do. They just said, we got to clean that up. Let's go back to playing the game right. I mean, is it a physical is there a physical part of this game? Absolutely. That's what drives most people to it. They love that aspect. That's what I loved about it. That's the challenge of the game. But the way it is designed, the cleaning up of it today, has made it a much better game, and really at all levels, not just the NFL level.
Merril Hoge, appreciate you as always, man. Always great talking to you. Your Call Football, that's what you're a part of. Everybody needs to do everything they can to find out as much about it as we possibly can. Always good talking to you, buddy. I'll talk to you down the line, okay?
Love you, brother. See you, buddy.
Same here, my man. The one and only Merril Hoge right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. 888-SAY-ESPN. It's 888-729-3776. Don't get him started about the CTEs, concussions in the National Football League. I mean, whoa. Boston University, he goes off every chance he gets about them. He won't let up. Talking about they're trying to ruin youth football. It's about that. It's about money. Somewhere, somehow. It'll be interesting to see those folks in the room together. I'd give them the platform for First Take to go head-to-head with each other and debate that one day. That would be something special to behold. 888-SAY-ESPN. It's 888-729-3776. You're listening live, Stephen A., ESPN Radio. We'll get back to your calls and more, some NBA stuff in a minute as well. Anthony Davis, Boston Celtics, Kyrie Irving. The list goes on and on. Stick around. Don't touch the dial. It's Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. By the way, when you're hiring, you don't want to waste time sorting through dozens of irrelevant resumes. You want an efficient way to get to a short list of qualified candidates. That's why you need Indeed.com.